All right, welcome to chapter 4. We will now be getting into probably more exciting things for you guys since you're nursing and you guys care about anatomy and physiology more so than cellular biology. So, this chapter will be focused in on tissues, the types of tissues we have, and their structure and organization of the cells inside of those. So, there are four main different types of tissues based upon their structure, the composition of non-cellular components such as the extracellular matrix, and then their function. Epithelial cells, like squamous cells in your lungs, intestinal ones as well. We have connective tissues, which you won't think a lot of the cell types that we'll talk about in connective as connective, but like adipose tissues, of course, our skeletal muscles and tendons and ligaments, those are connective tissues. We have muscle tissues, pretty straightforward there, then nervous. So a lot of the classifications of most of our cell types that we will talk about in anatomy and physiology will be considered epithelial or connective, because muscle and nervous are very specialized tissue types. So the beginnings of tissues really starts in the embryonic stage. That's because early on the tissue types are predetermined and set out at the germ layers. There's ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. Those are the three main germ layer types. We do offer a developmental biology class, but it's the hardest class in this university, in my opinion. But there's this smiling, lovely lady that teaches it named Dr. Goelzer. So it's a really good class, but they go into all in depth on tissues and embryonic tissues. And if you want to learn more about this stuff, maybe you can audit the class. But it starts from early development. The three different tissues go and do different things. So endoderm is the inner layer of the embryo. It forms most of the digestive tract and any derivative tissues and organs related to that. You have the mesoderm, which is in the middle here. That's really forming a lot of your connective-like tissues, such as muscles, bones, and blood vessels. And then your ectoderm, which is your outer layer. This is your skin and your nervous system, giving way to peripheral nerves, skin pigment, and some other cranial attributes and tissues. But it kind of makes sense where the inner layer forms your inner organs, your middle layer forms middle organs and tissues, and then outer forms outer layers like skin. We'll first start off here with epithelial tissue. Probably, in my opinion, it's the largest class of tissue types out there. In the PowerPoint, I included tables from the textbook. I will not go in depth on those tables, but you will probably need to know lots of the examples of those and different types of the tissues. They are composed mostly of cells with a very little matrix, right? Which is kind of different from connective tissue and muscle tissue. Where they have lots of extracellular matrix. Epithelial tissues, a lot of its main role is to cover body surfaces and form glands and cover, other organs and are part of the organs, such as your skin, your digestive tract, respiratory tract, your urinary genital systems, your heart and blood vessels, right? Other cavities, it lines for maintaining low friction and so forth, and protection and organization, your fascia. So there's distinct different types of surfaces on epithelial cells. There's the apical side or the free side, which is the top surface here. You have the basal side, which is the bottom part that will touch and connect to your connective tissue. And then there is the lateral surfaces, which is kind of like in between the apical and the basal layer. They are surrounded by other cells, which is pretty common for a lot of the cell types that we talk about. There's examples in the connective tissue where other cells do not touch each other, and it's a rare example of that. But they are touching other cells as well as the extracellular matrix, so proteins and things outside the cell. Typically, epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning it does not have blood vessels. So in order to receive materials, oxygen, and other things, it has to undergo diffusion. And that's why we learn about why diffusion is important from the underlying, the connective tissue where you have your blood vessels, right? The one highlight marker of epithelial tissue is they have high regeneration capacity. So they get damaged, they heal, reproduce, undergo mitosis very well. Think of your skin, right? You cut it, it heals pretty well, unless you did a bad cut and get scar tissue. But that's more of an issue related to improper healing of your extracellular matrix than the cell reproduction. So the basement membrane of epithelial cells is composed of a basal lamina that touches the cells really, so you can see it has the lamina lucida, a lamina densae, kind of more dense, less dense protein extracellular matrices. And then you have your reticular lamina, which is really forming a more specialized protein connection between your basal lamina to your connective tissue underneath. And that forms all of your basement membrane. So in your extracellular matrix, there's different combinations and concentrations of different types of proteins and different amounts and different levels. So there's like 26 different types of collagen proteins, and the amount of those determines what kind of extracellular matrix we're looking at. There's glycoproteins like fibronectin and proteoglycans as well. All of this is to say your basement membrane and extracellular matrix are there to support the cells and guide them during migration because of tissue repair. It allows movement, so diffusion of materials to your epithelial cells that are connected to it so they can live. So here's a nice bullet point list of what the functions of epithelial cells are, right? And so a lot of this is, my hint here is location indicates function. So if you're lining the intestinal tract, their structure and function is related to each other based upon their location. So there's protection of underlying structures such as your epithelium lining your mouth, right? Your mouth is exposed and the cells in your mouth are exposed to lots of trauma from you eating, right? So they need to reproduce, but also have certain characteristics themselves. They could act as a barrier, i.e. your skin or your integumentary system. They can permit passage of substances, nephrons in your kidneys, right? Filtering things out. Osmosis, diffusion, secretion, your mucus glands, absorbing, small intestine. So these are all functions of the epithelial cells, and the location of these epithelial cells really indicate, what kind of function they're going to perform. There are classifications of epithelial tissues, again, based upon function and location. Really more focused based upon the layers of epithelial cells you have. So there's simple, which is just one single layer that's connected to your basement membrane. Then there's your stratified epithelial tissues that have multiple layers of cells stacked on top of it. So you have basically a base cells, then more cells stacked on top of that, and then other cells on top of it. So this is really kind of an example of like your skin, where you have your epidermis and dermis and so forth. They're all epithelial cells, but they have different functions and characteristics that are attached to ultimately the underlying extracellular matrix that keeps the skin on your body. You don't want it falling off. classification of these epithelial cells / tissues, there are pseudostratified columnar cells. So they're stratified in the sense that they're, kind of stacked on top of each other, but not really. They're kind of squished together, but they're also columnar, so they look like columns. So most of the cells will contact the basement membrane, but I should say all of them do in this situation, but they look to be stratified, but they're not. But because of that, they're a simple tissue type versus the other type, which is the stratified, right? So they're pseudostratified. They're simple, but really look stratified. Then you have your transitional epithelial tissue types. This is a special type of stratified epithelium because you're changing shape as you approach the apical surface, so as you go away from one another. They change really from a cube-like shape, cuboidal, to a columnar, which is like, more rectangular in my opinion is what they look like, to squamous, which is kind of squished or stretched, right? This is like your skin, right? So there's transitional epithelium. There's like these three main types of tissue shapes or cell shapes. There's squamous, which is squished, so that's how I memorize it, squished, squamous. Say that 10 times fast. There's cuboidal cells, which are almost cubed-like, not perfectly, but they're more, each length of the side of the cell is pretty the same length, and this columnar cells are taller than they are wide. And these are the three types of cell shapes that we see in epithelial tissues. I have a whole bunch of slides here that are giving examples of different epithelial tissue types. I'm going to go fast through them, but I provide them so you have a nice location to study them and understand them. But like an example of simple squamous, its function, diffusion, filtration, secretion, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, alveoli of the lungs, kidney tubules, that sort of thing. Simple cuboidal, right? Single layer, but now they're a cubed layer. Secretion, absorption in the kidneys, glands, movement particles of mucus in and out. Again, location reveals function. Columnar, simple. This is like in your lungs, they're proteoles for ciliated cells. Also related to moving the egg, the oocytes, through the uterine tubes because they have ciliated cells on them. They're ciliated, so it helps movement. As well as in the stomach. Again, location can determine function. Pseudostratified, columnar, mucus cells moving in and out, foreign particles, so like nasal cavity, auditory tubes, pharynx, trachea, so a lot of movement related for the pseudostratified ones. You can have stratified squamous epithelium, so really helps protect against abrasion, so they could have it keratinized, so it has an extra protein called keratin in them, so it forms the outer layer of the skin, or non-keratized, so it has no keratin in them, so they produce like the mouth, throat, larynx, esophagus, other cavities that undergo lots of abrasive forces. Stratified cuboidal epithelium, right? So multi-layered cuboid cells, sweat glands, ovarian, follicular cells, salivary glands, that sort of thing. So secretion, absorption. You're starting to see a motif or repetition of function here. So stratified columnar, protection, so mammary gland ducts, male urethra. Transitional epithelial cells. So this really helps with volume control of organs or tubes. So like your bladder, your uterus, your urethra, that sort of thing. And then here's a nice highlighted table here in the next two slides as well, of just, okay, if it has a function like diffusion, what's it going to look like? Where's it going to be? Filtration, secretion, protection, mucus movement, other miscellaneous things. For simple epithelia, same thing for stratified, so more of what their functions are specifically and where you would find them. And so, yeah, we'll end the video there because we'll move on to like surface modifications of cells and cell connections that are different than just the organization of epithelial cells.